What's going on, man? Said from Said Talks TV. Today we get into it to get through it, man. We got a nice little video. We gonna chop it up. We gonna pause it. You know what I'm saying? We gonna go through it and we gonna really see what we can take from this. You know, because the popular topic has been, as of late, the streets. You know what I'm saying? So we're gonna do something a little bit different, and we're gonna really take it from a different angle and elaborate and collaborate on it in a different way, because I think we're missing a bigger message here and what's really going on, and what really needs to be communicated. What's the real message that needs to be communicated here? Because I think a lot of times when we do these topics, when people get to talking and doing topics and talking about different stuff, they look at it from a lower level and they don't really look at the whole picture. So let's dive right into it, man.
The story of what housing and other living conditions look like for many Black Americans is pretty bleak, and that's by design. In addition to artists cataloging their very personal experiences, it's been proven that the modern phenomenon of concentrated Black poverty was an intentional government-sponsored institution. This is in part why President Biden issued an executive order back in January, intended to right the historical wrongs Black folks have faced when it comes to housing and home ownership in this country. But first, let's take it back.
The dawn of the 20th century, African Americans in major cities lived scattered throughout the city. They weren't segregated particularly. It's only with the Great Migration of 6 to 7 million African Americans north and west escaping the South, the predominant response of the United States government and state and local governments to the Great Migration was to contain Black people in their own neighborhoods. And HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, was particularly a part of this role. But the precursors to HUD introduced and encouraged racially restrictive covenants, redlining of every major city where African Americans landed. The federal government was a sponsor of urban renewal, infamously called Negro removal by the great James Baldwin.
Okay, so for now, let's stop right there, right? Because it's very important to note that we're talking about the Great Migration. One thing I want to bring up is the Great Depression. During the Great Depression, many Blacks did not struggle the way that they painted out to be. They painted out to be like everyone was struggling, everyone was going through it to get to it, and in reality, that was not really what was taking place, because Black folks had already been, self-sufficient. We weren't allowed to use banks at the time, so we were in a situation where all of our money was outside the banks. So when the banks collapsed, it didn't have really a big impact on us, or a big collapse on us, because we weren't using them. There was a lot of programs, a lot of, housing programs and things like that we weren't allowed to use. And so when it came time for the system to crash, which it always does and it will, we were not involved and we're not a part of it. So we really were not affected. So when it came time to come out of the Great Depression, we were the ones who really carried America out of the Great Depression, because that's why certain brands like Cadillac, were so popular during that time, because the only people that were buying it were Black people. You know what I'm saying? So we were able to carry the American economy through that time and push it towards, the next stage past the Great Depression, to allow, for the economy to stay afloat. So I just want to make a note of that, because that's something that people don't really talk about a lot. A lot of times people group America as a whole together during the Great Depression and make it seem as though everyone struggled. And for the most part, Black Americans were not struggling like that, because we were not allowed to be a part of that system in the same way that everyone else was allowed to be. Okay, so let's continue.
Which means moving the Negroes out. It means Negro removal. That is what it means. And the federal government is is an accomplice to this fact.
That so-called urban renewal also included a federally sponsored interstate highway system, which was intentionally designed to mow through vibrant Black neighborhoods. Take Miami, for example. 2 highways, I-95 and I-395, bulldoze right through the predominantly Black and low-income Overtown neighborhood, previously called Colored Town during segregation.
The Department of Housing and Urban Development and the federal
Okay, let's stop it right there, right? Because a lot of people from St. Louis know for a fact that I-70 went straight through Kinloch, Calverton Park, a historically Black community in Berkeley, and there were historically Black communities that were set up and destroyed in the building of 170 or of I-70. So therefore, what we're talking about in this video, as far as highways being established, highways being built and destroying these communities, this happened not only in Miami, this happened in St. Louis, and it happened across the nation. So when one thing happened in one particular area, take note of the fact that it took place in more than just one area. Let's continue.
writ large in the first 7 decades of the 20th century invested billions of dollars in racial segregation and concentrated poverty. Each time this country created a peculiar institution that subordinated Black people, slavery, Jim Crow, it created and dismantled it. They replaced it with another one. And the iconic Black ghetto, I don't use that as a pejorative, I use it as a descriptor, was a follow-on institution to slavery and Jim Crow. That's the legacy that every new administration inherits, and the Biden administration has as well.
Today, I'm directing the Department of Housing and Urban Affairs and Urban Development
Sleepy
to address
Joe.
historical racism in federal housing policies.
This executive order is just one of 4 signed by President Biden, designed to address racial equity in the United States. And while this progress is a step in the right direction, there's still a lot of harm to undo.
Segregation started coming down after the passage of the Fair Housing Act of 1968, which actually only got passed in the wake of Dr. Martin Luther King's assassination. In 1980, 8 out of 10 Black people would have had to move in order to be evenly integrated.
Who assassinated
within
Martin Luther King?
metropolitan areas. Half
3-letter
of Black
word.
people who live in metropolitan areas still live in neighborhoods of high segregation. So we've had modest improvement, but segregation persists. And economic segregation has spiked since 1970. The so-called American dream is
Okay.
working for...
Another example of economic segregation, the Del Mar Divide. Anybody from St. Louis knows the Del Mar Divide is a huge economic segregation, because as far as north and south of the Del Mar Divide, totally different worlds, in complete contrast to the other. Not just taking place in one area, taking place across the states. Take note of that.
Small slice of the population that can afford
It's
to
never
buy
just in
their
one
way
area.
into what I call gold standard neighborhoods that have the best of everything, and everybody else struggles, and the Black poor struggle the most.
So what happens now? Well, some advocates are hopeful.
Home applauds this executive order for really focusing on historical patterns of racial segregation and discrimination in housing.
While others remain cautiously optimistic. Here's Professor Cashin's suggestion.
I don't take credit for this, but I applaud it. There should be an equity analysis. The federal government spends so much money, it should track who's getting it by neighborhood. And it should pursue racial equity in the distribution of resources. There's been a lot of movement at the local level on this. For the example of Baltimore, they did an equity analysis and found that they were spending 4 times as much money in majority white neighborhoods as the majority Black ones. I think we're in this moment where people are waking up, sad to say, because of the slow execution of George Floyd, to the realities of systemic racism. And I believe there is an ascending majority multiracial coalition that wants something better than a separate unequal nation that overinvests in some neighborhoods and disinvests and preys upon people in other neighborhoods. I'm hopeful, but you can never stop working for and organizing for the country you want. Generations more radical and less tired than me. There's always another generation coming.
You know what's so sad, man? You know what's wild? Martin Luther King stood for nonviolence.
Okay, so boom, check it out. When we get to talking about the streets versus the ghetto versus the people, something that we have to take note is, how did our people end up in the ghetto? How did our people end up in the hood? The hood was short for neighborhood, but at the time, it was not the ghetto. It was where black people lived, worked, and played all in the same area, congregated, and this was all that we knew. This is where we were forced to settle, right? So at the time, it wasn't the ghetto. You know, the hood now is what the ghetto was, and the ghetto is the best definition of something negative, of drugs, you know, guns, no jobs, food deserts. That's what the ghetto was, and that's what the hood is now. So when we talk about the street culture emerged from what was the ghetto, that is the hood now. So with that being said, we have to take note of the fact that, you know, that our norm was never to be ghetto. Our norm was never to be ratchet. Our norm was to survive. Our norm was to live amongst each other and to survive. And quite frankly, it wasn't until probably the 80s and the 90s where the hood transformed from just regular neighborhood where it was a lot of blacks living, to becoming the ghetto, to every hood becoming the ghetto. That was an entirely different culture in itself, and it emerged as well as with the street culture. And so when someone says F the streets, they're referring to the street culture, right? But the street culture isn't even something that we just decided all of a sudden we're going to just create. It came as a result of lack of funding, lack of economic success, lack of real estate and prosperity. It all stems from poverty, which, as we could see from the video, was a direct result of the oppression that we were going through at the time. This was not something that was just an original idea that we just woke up one day and decided that this was going to be our reality. This was, as a result of this, we have transformed this. This is a result of where we're living and how we're living to how we're going to survive. Okay, so I don't want people to sit up there and say that they're ashamed of where they come from, but you have to understand why where you come from is what it is. It was created that way for you to fail. It was created that way for you to not be successful. It was created that way for as many definitions that we have, as many examples that we have of a Boosie or of a Waka Flocka Flame. We have somebody who we don't know their name who died. That is what it was created to do. These drugs, these guns were all put there for us to use on each other, to not prosper from, to not survive from, to die from. Okay? So we cannot sit up here and act like it's all bad, but at the same time, it was not our original idea, nor was it from our original mind, nor was it in our original intention to live the way that we do today. That was not something that we came and just congregated amongst each other and said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to create the hood. We're going to create the ghetto. We're going to create these different organizations for our young men to die a part of or to die for. That was not our idea. That was not our intention whatsoever. All of this was put in front of us and we picked it up. Without great leadership comes great destruction. And so we decided, when there was no leadership to lead ourselves, and we chose great destruction instead because it was right in front of us. See, they say you can't lead a horse to water. They say you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But if I culminated an environment for this horse to get so thirsty to where it's in front of the water and it is forced to drink because of the environment I created, that is the best definition of what the Black community is experiencing today. We were not forced to drink, but we were led to the water. And because of our circumstances, because of our environment, we ended up drinking. It was the easy thing to go ahead and drink. Not only that, majority of the wisdom, not only that, majority of the elders who are used for wisdom were getting locked up at this time. So the people that could have really had an impact on the youth were not around to stop what was going to happen to us. So that's a big part of why we ended up where we ended up and why the street culture became so strong in our culture as a whole. See, the street culture comes from the mob. That comes from people like the Irish mob, the Italian mob. That comes from their culture, right? But it also comes as they migrated over from Europe to America to survive. And as we were put in the ghetto to survive, we decided to go ahead and accept this culture as what was our norm, rather than accepting a culture of intelligence, accepting a culture of prosperity. We were all about survival and have been all about survival for as long as I can remember. This is not the way of our ancestors. This is not the way of our first mind. This is the way of the second mind that was developed after we tried to fight against the slavery, tried to fight against what had happened to our predecessors and ancestors, and then our people were born here, and this is all that they knew. So it's all a chain effect. As she mentioned in the video, it was one implementation of systematic racism after another. One after another, right? So when you look at people in the ghetto and you look at the behavior, it's similar to looking at an animal in a cage whenever you, or in the jungle, whenever you say this is the Wild Wild West. The behaviors are all survival behaviors. It's a survival instinct. It's a survival mechanism. So when you look at certain behaviors that take place in not so great environments, it's because it's survival. So when you see things on the news, these are people that are not operating out of intelligence, but they are operating out of survival. And when you're operating out of survival, you're in your lowest frequency that you can be in. So you miss all of the right decisions. You miss all of the decisions that would be intelligent. You only make decisions that you think are going to keep you alive. Right? These are decisions that are going to keep you alive, or so you think, or are going to help with your survival in some kind of way. It's similar to when you drop a bunch of people off on an island and they have to survive. What do? You may see them eating bugs. You may see them, creating shelter. You may see them doing things that in our natural society we would not think of as something that we would do, but it's survival. It's human nature. It's the flesh that God created for us, that we live inside of, that whenever the environment is culminated a certain way, we are going to react and we are going to make decisions in a certain way that best benefit this body. Or so we think. Okay, so when you look at people and what they're doing, you have to understand where that comes from. So when people are saying F the street culture is a direct result of the ghetto. The ghetto is a direct result of redlining and making certain housing available to certain people. It's all a chain effect, and it can be traced back, and it doesn't take a lot of effort to trace it back to where it originated. So people that aren't in the know or aren't intelligent about these type of programs, about what happened to our people way back when and where it has us now, are people who just don't have an interest or don't care because it doesn't affect them. It's really easy to say something that doesn't affect me, I'm not going to be educated about, because